official yet. But if they close the college down, whenever they open it again, either on Monday or Wednesday, the week following, we'll have our test. All right. Those of you who are here heard that. It's after 2:30. The rest of them should check their syllabus, or should check. If they, well, of course, you know when the school closes, I hope. All right, we'll leave that. All right. We left off last time with the beginning of the start of Christianity. Now, there have been many a book written on this subject, but we're not going to spend the whole time on it, just a little bit, then move on. The religion of the Romans, to start off with, is paganism. Basically, they worshiped the same gods the Greeks did. But like the Greeks, after a time, they became less and less happy with the worship of the Olympian deities. I mean, they believed that the gods lived on Mount Olympus, which was north of Greece. But they became less and less happy with the Olympian deities. And that meant things were ripe for a new religion. Now, for the last couple hundred years before Jesus was born, Jews had been scattering all over the Roman Empire. And when they did, they did not try to convert their neighbors. I mean, you've got to be a Jew by being born into it. But they would at least teach their neighbors that they believed that a Messiah was coming. They would also teach them a few of the basics of their religion, that they only believed in one God and that He was the only one. They did not participate in military service, owing to the fact that they were against eating pork. And the Romans' armies often served their troops pork, so Jews did not serve in the army. Now, the Jews would celebrate Passover, but they'd make it a point to, like Muslims, try to go to Mecca once in their lifetime. The Jews would try to go back to Jerusalem to offer a sacrifice at least once in their lifetime. The sacrifices could only be done in Jerusalem. Now, of course, everywhere the Jews went, they set up synagogues, places of worship. We have a Jewish synagogue nearby here, but they set up synagogues. And again, they were all over the empire. Now, at Passover, they would come back. Passover always occurs on the 14th day of the month of Nisan. Now, what does that mean? It means that Passover always occurs on a full moon. The Jewish calendar is lunar. Passover occurs approximately the first full moon after the spring equinox. In other words, Passover can occur in March. Most of the time it occurs in April. Now, a high Passover is a Passover that occurs on a Sabbath day, which would happen once every 7 years. Now, Jesus was crucified. I mean, I'm not going to go into detail about the public career of Jesus, but he was crucified on Friday, the 13th, the day of the month of Nisan, which meant that he was in the tomb on the high Passover. That's very important because it was a high Passover. It meant that Jews from all over the known world, or all over around on all sides of Judea, were coming back home. And they wouldn't just, like we would do today, fly in, stay a day for the Passover, and then on the day after Passover, leave. No, they would stay for weeks. And most of them who came for Passover were still there 50 days later for Pentecost. That's what Pentecost means. Then after Pentecost, most of them returned home and told their relatives all about what had happened in Judea. And that way, Christianity got a jump start. In other words, all the Jews all over the world heard about what had happened on this particular occasion around the year 30 CE. Anyway, Now, what got Christianity off to a start was the Jews had been looking for their Messiah. The Greeks called it, the Greek word is Christos. The English word is Christ. Or the Jewish word is Mashiach, or Messiah, which means anointed one. The Jews have been looking for the Messiah ever since the days of Moses, 1,300 years before. Well, a lot of Jews began to believe that Jesus was that Messiah, and they went around spreading the word of the Messiah to the Jews, at first only to Jews. Into this scenario came Saul, otherwise his name was changed to Paul, Paul of Tarsus. Paul of Tarsus is remembered for two things. Actually, he's remembered for several, but for two things. Number one, he began to preach Christianity to Gentiles. That is, people who were not Jews. And he wrote letters that became the foundation for Christian belief. His letters make up much of the New Testament. Now, the reason Paul started preaching to Gentiles, everywhere Paul would go, he would go to a Jewish synagogue. Like I say, this was what got Christianity jump-started. There was a Jewish synagogue in every Roman city. Paul would go to the Jewish synagogue, and generally the Jews tended to live among themselves in what we might today call a ghetto. Now, that word ghetto, I know, has a bad connotation for some of you, but ghetto is generally a place where one kind of people live in a section of town. So Paul would go to the Jewish section of town, go to the synagogue, and tell the Jews there that their Messiah had come. Most Jews did not believe it. And finally, Paul one day said to the Jews, "Fury on you, I'm going to the Gentiles." And the Gentiles embraced Christianity much more readily than the Jews did, for reasons we'll get into in a few minutes. Now, as for Paul's letters, I got some flack when I said this morning, but I'm going to say it anyway. The gist of the letters can be summed up in one word, and that one word is believe. And a fellow pointed out, "What do you mean by believe?" I said, "Well, if you want to be saved, just believe. Just believe." It's simple. Paul said, you don't get saved by keeping a bunch of rules and laws. Just believe. Sums up all of his epistles in just one word. Essentially that became the foundation of the Christian belief that was to come later. Now, Christianity was persecuted first by the Jews, who did not like the idea that Jesus was Messiah. And to this day, I mean, I was asked one time, what's the difference between a Jew and a Christian? The answer to that is there's only one. I mean, all groups have all kinds of beliefs, but the one difference is that Christians believe Jesus was God's promised Messiah, and the Jews generally don't. Now, among the Jews, every generation has had voluntary converts. Queen Isabella had a voluntary convert. I don't mean foursquare, I mean persons who actually chose to believe. Queen Isabella had such a person in her court who financed Columbus. But anyway, there have always been, all down through the generations, Jews who have believed. Now, Christianity spread slowly at first. It was opposed. The first emperor who persecuted Christians was Nero, whom I've already mentioned. And I mentioned how that somebody told persons that someday men would name their sons Paul and their dogs Nero. One of the girls in the other class said that she had named her dog Nero. There have been 8 popes who have taken the name of Paul, and not one pope has taken the name of Nero. No human is called Nero anymore than I know of. But anyway, Nero started the first persecution of Christians, and it's been said that he killed both Peter and Paul. Peter was one of Christ's disciples. Then Christianity faced a lot of problems, not only persecution, but they faced the problem of what we might call heresy. They did not know for sure what they believed. And one person believed this, another believed that, and that is still going on among Christians to this day. They also faced the problem with Gnosticism. I won't get into what that is, but the Gnostics had a strong appeal to a lot of people, particularly the more intelligent. And this did a lot to, I mean, it looked like for a while that Christianity would be wiped off the face of the earth. It wasn't. Now, the question is why? What gave Christianity its appeal? One reason, it might not be reason number one, but one reason was Christians lived noticeably longer than the pagans did. The average pagan in Roman times is said to have lived only 22 years, but that average is brought way down by the number of babies who died. But if you only count people who live 10 years old in the average, and don't count the persons younger than that, the average age of most pagans, the average age of death was only in their 30s. Most pagans did not live long. Christians, on the other hand, lived an average of somewhat close to 60 years. Now, even in modern times, a lot of persons, you at least used to say, and I haven't heard that lately, but you say that people of faith live longer than people of no faith, and people of faith are more likely to recover from cancers or other deadly diseases than people who don't. But the contrast was marked. Now, why did the Christians live so much longer? It is believed that it was because Christians did not take part in the excessive partying and drinking, gluttonous eating that the pagans did, that greatly shortened the pagans' lives. All-night parties where they would engage in heavy eating and drinking, go to a latrine, regurgitate, then go back and eat some more. This did not lead to them living a long life. Christians would not participate. Also, when a person got the plague, the pagans tended to abandon that person and leave him in isolation. Christians would stay around. Now you might ask, didn't some of the Christians get the plague? Yes, but it's known that most persons who got the plague, if there were just somebody around to take care of them, they had a 50-50 chance to recover, and once they had recovered, they were immune. So a lot of Christians recovered the plague, and also Christians would stay around and assist persons who were not Christians, and this got the people interested. And this may surprise you, but a lot of pagans who watched Christians being torn apart by lions said, hey, they have something I want. If they were willing to die for that, then they have something that's... And they would oftentimes decide to converge because they were impressed with the steadfastness of the Christians. A big reason why Christianity spread was, unlike the pagan religions, it promised a wonderful afterlife. The mystery religions did too, but the problem with the mystery religions, they only took in a few people. But the Christianity promised a happy afterlife for its followers, that is, persons who believed. Also, Christianity took in anybody who was willing to join, including, yes, even the prostitute, even the thief, even the uneducated, the feeble-minded, as well as persons who lived in Caesar's palace. Governors, people high up. Christianity took all of them, and eventually they took in the emperor. Unlike the mystery religions, there was no elaborate initiation, unless you call baptism an initiation. But there was no elaborate initiation. But another problem, among the pagans, the morality of the pagans has become extremely bad. They loved brutality in sports, and a lot of people began to question, hey, is this right? The strong ruled over the weak, and a lot of people began to resent that. There was a case where a man who was obviously guilty went to court against another man who was poor. The man who was guilty said, look, I know this man, he has done some work. I never worked in my life. The judge decided in favor of the rich man who had never worked, just because he was rich. This kind of thing went on over and over again among the pagans. The government became unstable. We'll talk in more detail about this, but particularly after Marcus Aurelius, the Roman government became highly unstable. This paved the way for Christianity. Now, here is an issue, folk. The pagans would take babies whom they did not want and take them out into the wilderness, drop them off and leave them to die, starve to death or be eaten by wild animals. Christians did not do this. But the pagans did. And just recently, like within this year, I heard that one of the reasons the pagans hated the Christians was that Christians would go into the wilderness and try to rescue these babies. Now, they only rescued a small percentage of them at best, but they rescued enough of them to make the people of Rome really, really angry at them. Now, I have mentioned that women at this time lost the respect. Christianity seemed to have a soft spot for women, particularly with the liking for the Virgin Mary and some of the other female heroes in the New Testament, among them a woman named Dorcas and Mary Magdalene and a few like that. Christianity tended to elevate women while at the same time teaching that women should be under subjection. The pagan world, women began to be liked less and less. All right. So much for that. Unless any of you have any comments, questions, then I'll move on. Next topic. Fall of Rome. Big topic, really. Now, before I start, I want to state on the record that what I'm about to say might offend some of you. I'm not going to promise that it won't. I mean, it's just, I have to say what I believe is right. I want to open up by saying that what I'm about to say about the Roman Empire, I believe, applies very strongly to the United States of America today, as well as Western civilization. Very strongly. That we here in the United States today are doing very much the same things that the Roman Empire did. Now, about 54 years ago, when I was in high school, my first term paper was on is American society following in the footsteps of the Roman Empire. But there was a lot that I've learned since, and a lot that's been happening since then that I did not know. Among them, the Roman Empire let a whole lot of foreigners in who were uncivilized. And we are doing the same thing. Now, I'm going to get this off my chest right now. I'm hesitant, but I mean, if you think I'm shaking in my shoes, perhaps you're right. The number one thing that went wrong with the Roman Empire was their population decline. Your book says that its height, they went from 50 million to 30 million. And I had a pupil say, oh, they moved from city to country. No, I'm talking about the whole Roman Empire. They did not move from city to country. They simply died out without reproducing themselves. That's what I mean. And it wasn't the wars that did it. It wasn't the plagues. Part of it was the men and women did not like each other. But a big part of it was they exposed their babies, too many of them. Now, we in the United States today are doing the same thing, but we call it abortion. 60 million babies have been aborted in the United States, 60 million, since January 1973. What this means, folks, on a practical level, is that you younger people will not be able to draw Social Security. Some of you know this already. And also, what I'm really afraid that it means is the same things that happened to us as happened to Rome. Rome lost two big fights late in its history that they would have had to have won. if, all right, the 50 million people that Rome had in the days of